Imagine waking up one morning and deciding to move a mountain, not a small hill. A mountain. It is hundreds of meters high. It has been there longer than anyone can remember. And you are an old man. You don't have money. You don't have machines. You don't have an army. You don't even have enough strength to carry a large rock. Your neighbors look at you and laugh. Your family thinks you've lost your mind. And one question seems impossible to answer. Why would anyone spend the rest of their life fighting something they can never defeat? But this old man did exactly that. And the strangest part of the story is that he may not have been crazy. His name was Yu Gong. And his story forces us to ask a question that still matters today. When should you never give up? And when should you finally walk away? Long ago, there lived an old man known as Yu Gong. He was nearly 90 years old. He lived with his family in a small village. Their home was surrounded by two enormous mountains. The mountains created a serious problem. Whenever the family needed to travel, they had to walk around them. A journey that should have taken a short time could take much longer. For years, everyone accepted it. This is simply how life is. The mountains had always been there. Nobody believed they could be moved. But Yu Gong became increasingly frustrated. One day, he gathered his family. We are going to remove these mountains. Everyone stared at him. His children thought he was serious. His neighbors thought he was joking. But Yu Gong was not joking. He believed the mountains could be removed, one rock at a time. The next morning, Yu Gong and his family began digging. They used simple tools. They broke rocks. They carried dirt. They worked from sunrise to sunset. Then they carried the dirt and rocks away. It was exhausting, and almost nothing seemed to change. The mountain looked exactly the same. After several days, a neighbor came to watch. He laughed. "You're almost 19 years old. You will never finish this. Even if you work until you die, the mountain will still be here." Yu Gong looked at him, then calmly replied, "I may die. My children will continue. My children will have children, and their children will have children. My family will continue to grow, but the mountain will not." The neighbor had no answer, because Yu Gong had just changed the question. He wasn't asking, "Can I finish this in my lifetime?" He was asking, "Can this eventually be finished?" And those are two very different questions. The work continued every day. Yu Gong carried rocks away. People laughed. Some called him foolish. Others called him stubborn. But Yu Gong didn't care. He had made his decision. And slowly, the story of the old man fighting the mountain began spreading beyond the village. Until eventually, the story reached someone who could change everything. The villagers continued watching Yu Gong. Every morning, they saw the same scene. An old man, a shovel, a mountain, and the same impossible task. Nothing seemed to change. One day, a wise old man came to visit. He looked at the mountain. Then he looked at Yu Gong. "You are wasting your life." Yu Gong asked, "Why?" The old man pointed at the mountain. "Look at its size. Look at your age. Look at your tools. Be realistic. Some problems are simply too big." Yu Gong listened quietly. Then he said, "You are right." The old man smiled. Finally, Yu Gong understood. But then Yu Gong continued, "It is too big for me, but it is not too big for my family." The old man didn't understand. Yu Gong explained, "I don't need to finish the mountain today. I only need to make it smaller. One rock, one basket, one day at a time." This idea sounds simple, but it contains something powerful. Most people quit because they measure the size of the problem instead of the progress they are making. Think about someone trying to lose weight. They step on the scale after 1 week. Nothing changes. They become frustrated. They quit. A person learning a language studies for a month. They still can't speak fluently. They quit. Someone starts a business. The first few months produce almost no income. They quit. Why? Because humans are impatient with invisible progress. Yugong understood something different. The mountain did not need to disappear tomorrow. It only needed to become smaller. But then another problem appeared. Yugong was getting older. His body became weaker. His ability to work decreased. The mountain still looked enormous. At this point, a reasonable person would stop. And perhaps this is where the story becomes interesting, because there is a difference between persistence and stubbornness. Persistence means, I know this is difficult, but the goal still makes sense. Stubbornness means, I refuse to admit that my strategy no longer works. The difference is enormous. Yugong's goal was not to prove he was right. His goal was to make life easier for his family. And because that goal could continue through future generations, he didn't need to personally finish the job. He had changed the game. He was no longer measuring success by his own lifetime. He was measuring it by the future. Then something strange happened. The story says that the heavens noticed Yugong's determination. The gods were amazed that an old man was willing to spend his life moving mountains. They decided to move the mountains for him. The mountains disappeared. The path was open. Yugong's impossible mission was complete. Of course, whether you believe this part literally is not the point. The deeper meaning is more interesting. The story is telling us, when you begin working on an impossible problem, you may discover solutions you could never see before you started. A person who never begins never discovers what is possible. There is something uncomfortable about the story of Yugong, because if we take the lesson too literally, it can become dangerous. Imagine someone saying, I will never give up. Sounds inspiring. But what if they are pursuing the wrong goal? What if the strategy doesn't work? What if they are destroying their health? What if they are sacrificing their family? What if there is a better path? This is where modern life becomes complicated. We are often told, never quit. Keep going. Believe in yourself. But sometimes, quitting is the intelligent decision. Imagine an entrepreneur who spends 10 years building a business that nobody wants. He keeps saying, I just need to work harder. But maybe the problem isn't effort. Maybe the product is wrong. Maybe the market doesn't exist. Maybe the strategy needs to change. Working harder does not always solve the wrong problem. Yugong gives us an important distinction. Don't confuse commitment to the goal with commitment to one strategy. You can change your method without abandoning your dream. You can change your path without changing your destination. Every person has a mountain. For some people, it's money. For others, it's education, a career, a relationship, a personal weakness, a dream they've carried for years. And when the mountain looks too large, we usually make one of two mistakes. We either quit too early or refuse to change anything. Both can destroy us. The better question is, what exactly am I trying to achieve? Then ask, is the goal still worth pursuing? And finally, is my current method actually working? If the answer to the first question is yes, keep the goal. If the answer to the third question is no, change the method. That is not failure. That is intelligence. Think about learning a difficult skill. At first, progress is almost invisible. You practice. Nothing happens. You practice again. Still nothing. Most people quit during this stage, but skills often develop quietly. Then suddenly, something clicks. The person who almost quit discovers, I was closer than I thought. This happens in business. It happens in fitness. It happens in relationships. It happens in personal growth. The problem is that we rarely know how close we are to a breakthrough. That is why persistence matters. But there is another side. Sometimes you have been digging for 10 years, and the mountain has not moved. Then persistence becomes a courage. Do I have the courage to change direction? Lesson 1. Don't measure your life only by immediate results. Some progress is invisible. Lesson 2. Protect the goal, not the method. If something isn't working, change the strategy. Lesson 3. Know the difference between persistence and stubbornness. Persistence says, I will find another way. Stubbornness says, I will do the same thing again. Perhaps the most interesting thing about Yugong is that the mountain was never really the main character. The mountain was simply a symbol of every problem that looks impossible. Until you start breaking it into pieces. A person looks at their debt. It seems impossible. But one payment at a time, it becomes smaller. A person looks at a 10-year career goal. It seems impossible. But one skill at a time, it becomes possible. A person wants to completely change their life. That can feel overwhelming. But one habit, one decision, one day at a time, the mountain begins to move. The problem is that humans want dramatic transformation. We want to wake up tomorrow and become a completely different person. But real transformation is usually boring. It looks like one page, one workout, one difficult conversation, one application, one video, one mistake, one improvement, repeated thousands of times. People don't always quit because the goal is impossible. Sometimes they quit because the progress is too slow to feel rewarding. This is one of the biggest psychological traps in modern life. Social media shows us overnight success. A business suddenly becomes successful. Someone suddenly becomes wealthy. Someone suddenly loses weight. Someone suddenly becomes famous. We don't see the years of invisible work. So we compare our beginning with someone else's result. And we conclude, I'm not making progress. But maybe you are. Maybe your mountain is already smaller. You just haven't noticed. So here is the question I want you to take from this story. Think about something you'd been struggling with. A dream, a problem, a goal. Now ask yourself, am I standing in front of a mountain? Or am I standing in front of a mountain that I have never tried to climb? There is a difference. And then ask another question. Do I need more persistence? Or do I need a better strategy? That question can change your life. Because sometimes the answer is keep going. And sometimes the answer is turn around, find another path. Yu Gong was an old man. His tools were primitive. His mountain was enormous. And yet he began. Maybe that is the real lesson. Not that every mountain can be moved. Not that every dream will come true. But that we should not automatically accept the size of a problem as proof that it is impossible. Sometimes, the only way to discover what is possible is to begin. But remember, persistence without wisdom becomes stubbornness. Wisdom without action becomes another form of fear. The goal is not to keep digging forever. The goal is to keep moving toward what matters, while having the courage to change the way you get there. Welcome to Human Nature Chronicles. Here we explore ancient stories, forgotten legends, and moments from history, not simply to understand what happened in the past, but to understand ourselves today. Because the world changes, technology changes, countries change, but human nature often remains surprisingly familiar. We still struggle with fear, pride, ambition, failure, and the difficult question of when to keep going and when to let go. If today's story made you think differently about one of your own mountains, consider subscribing. There is always another story waiting to teach us something about ourselves. Until next time, remember, you don't have to move the whole mountain today. Sometimes you only need to move one stone. And if the path stops making sense, have the courage to find another way.